Good day. I can't say good morning or afternoon because it's split between the time zones. Welcome to Business Lessons from the Military, one of the Way to Wow shows that we feature each week. I'm Kevin Bemmel, your host, and each Tuesday, 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and an hour in for Central and Mountain time, we talk about business doctrine, military doctrine, military history, and great military leaders, and how we can apply that to our businesses in a way to help them prosper. So whether you have your own business or whether you work for a company and are in a role where you can have an impact on how that business operates, this is the place to come to get ideas that come from the military that you can apply then in your organization. And the fact of the matter is, they would work equally well whether it's a for-profit business or a nonprofit. I don't think that really matters. The profit, I mean, if you can imagine, war is not a profit motive function per se, and so that isn't necessarily embedded into what we're talking about. We really get into things like motivations, strategic planning, how to scale operations, those sorts of questions. So for the last several weeks, we've been looking at a part of Marine Corps warfighting doctrine. I'm going to go ahead and bring up our PowerPoint so that we can continue with it. This is actually the final phase of a five section portion. And let's go ahead and here we go, slideshow, bang. Okay, so here we go. Business lessons from the military. And as always, everything we do on the Way to Wow shows relate to the 3 pillars of attainment. There's other videos on that, so I'm not going to spend time here. So we're talking about the theory of war applied to business. Okay, that's been our subject for the last few weeks. And those include levels of activity, actions, styles, generating power, okay? And finally, decisive aims. I am doing the right one for this time, aren't I? Every once in a while, I do the wrong lesson. So hold on one second. Yes. Okay. Yes, we are doing the right one for today. So the reason I double checked is because you'll see if you go onto our channel that I did a couple of them out of order. But anyway, all of these previous, what did I do here? All of our previous lessons that I just mentioned, generating power, styles, actions, levels of activity. If you go to our YouTube channel, the Way to Wow, YouTube at the Way to Wow show, basically, you can watch those and review them. We're going to wrap up talking about decisive aims. Okay, so we build up these businesses, we hire staff, we maybe put together a bricks and mortar office or bricks and mortar place of business in any event. It may be a factory, could be a retail location or a restaurant, whatever it is. And so we've got all these resources ready to go. And too often, I think, we dissipate all of these resources by not being focused on decisive aims. Okay, so let's start, as we usually do, looking at this from a military perspective, from a warfighting perspective. So you've got your army. Maybe you are a battalion commander. So you've got 3 or 4 companies, and each of those companies breaks down into platoons and rifle teams, etc. You've got them equipped. You've got your supply chain ready with food, with ammunition. You've got your intelligence working. You've got your orders from the higher echelon. And It's already there to go. And the reality is, in order to be successful pursuing your part of the fight, you need to know, what are my goals? What are my decisive aims that are really going to maximize the benefit I get from all of the resources that are now mustered and at my disposal, me being the commander, right? So the reality is, you could have the largest, most powerful military in the world, and if you spread it too thinly, you're never going to win. You're never going to win. Sorry, Siri likes to get on the act for some reason. I'm not sure why. And by the way, we've seen this in other situations. In the end, why did Nazi Germany lose World War II? Well, one of the big reasons was because they had to fight on both the Eastern and the Western Front. They had to so disperse their military power that they couldn't focus on decisive aims. They were constantly having to shift resources back and forth between the two fronts. And although they had a huge military, it just wasn't big enough to deal with all of what they had to deal with. And by the way, that's why at the beginning of the war, Hitler made an agreement with Stalin, the non-aggression pact with Stalin. It was to avoid a situation where he had to fight on two fronts. And so the reason he had success in the early days of World War II was he had very decisive aims. So while he neutralized Russia or the Soviet Union as a threat on his Eastern Front, then he could focus on decisive aims in pushing west through the Low Countries and then into France, conquering, most of Western Europe after he had previously conquered really Central Europe, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, Austria, etc. Okay, Poland as well, by the way. So it was by concentrating on decisive aims that Hitler was able to be successful in the early part of World War II. Likewise, and I use World War II examples because I think they're most vivid. So likewise in the Pacific, once the United States realized that it didn't need to capture every single island that the Imperial Japanese held, rather they could choose specific ones and island hop to get closer and closer to the Japanese mainland, the war in the Pacific became much more successful. It advanced much more rapidly. And it was because of this idea of decisive aims. Okay, so although this is a Marine Corps warfighting doctrine, it was applied. And by the way, what I'm talking about in World War II predated the codification of this version, anyway, of Marine Corps warfighting doctrine. But you can see that this doctrine was informed by what happened in past military operations. Okay, so there are essentially two types of decisive aims. One is centers of gravity, and the other is critical vulnerabilities. Okay, so I'm going to continue to talk in a warfighting context for a few more minutes, and then we'll apply this to the business world. So a center of gravity is where the enemy has strength. Okay, where the enemy has strength. Okay, so set that aside, or just hold on to that for a minute. A critical vulnerability is where the enemy is particularly weak. Okay, so they're opposites, but they're also complementary. Okay, the enemy can't be strong everywhere. Okay, that would dissipate their forces too much, no matter how big they are. They're gonna be vulnerable somewhere. Now, and they're going to be stronger in other places. Now, the difference between areas of strength and areas of vulnerability are, a center of gravity is a particular area of strength that really is important to the enemy's warfighting ability. Okay, so, and by the way, these don't necessarily have to be physical. They can be mental, they can be moral. Okay, so let's go back to our example of World War II. A center of gravity for Nazi Germany was its submarine base on the northern coast of France. Okay, that submarine base, where most of the North Atlantic submarine operations were, went out from, okay, represented not just as an area of strength, but a center of gravity. Okay, and one of the reasons why it was a center of gravity is because it allowed the U-boats to have much longer range. Well, not much longer range, to be able to stay at sea longer, because they could sail from Brest on the north coast of France rather than having to sail from Germany, which was a longer distance. Okay, and so all of a sudden I went up on the name of the Nazi Germany submarine command. Admiral Donitz, once he was able to base his submarines at Brest, he was able to pursue the North Atlantic battle much better. The flip side is, if the Allies had been able to destroy the submarine base at Brest, and they tried mightily hard to do that, it would have represented a major setback for the Nazi war effort. Now, the reality was Brest was built so strongly, although the Allies could damage it through bombings, they never were able to put Brest out of commission. And indeed, the Allies won the Battle of the Atlantic through other means, but they never were able to destroy that particular center of gravity. Okay? Now, so that's a center of gravity. And a center of gravity for the Allies was the morale of the British people. So despite the bombings in the early part of the war, conventional bombings, and later the U-1s and the U-2s, the sort of missile bombings that Nazi Germany pursued against England, Great Britain, and more largely Great Britain, the fighting spirit of the British continued. They, and part of that, I think, was due to the inspired leadership of Winston Churchill, and part of it was due to just the British character, perhaps. But there's no doubting that Adolf Hitler tried to break British morale through his bombing campaigns. That was the point, and he was not able to do it. So that's a different kind. That's not a physical center of gravity. That's more of a mental, moral center of gravity. Okay. And by the way, sometimes these mental and moral centers of gravity are even stronger than a physical center of gravity, because with enough firepower, we may be able to destroy a physical center of gravity. But oftentimes the reverse happens when it comes to moral and mental center of gravity. So the Allies pursued essentially around-the-clock bombing of German cities in an effort to break the morale of the German people. It actually had the opposite effect. So things like the bombing of Dresden, for example, that basically wiped out that city, it didn't cause the German people. I mean, the Allies thought it did during the war, but after the war, when these issues were studied, it had the opposite effect on German morale. Those bombing runs afterwards, the Germans tended to be more committed to the war effort, not less. Okay, So, okay, so that's from a military standpoint, that center of gravity. Now, critical vulnerabilities. These are not just weak points, but very weak points that either the enemy may not be aware of, or they are, but they just don't have the ability to protect them. Okay, so let me think of a critical vulnerability. Okay. With due respect to Italy and the Italians. So for Hitler, Italy turned out to be a critical vulnerability. The fact of the matter is, although Mussolini wanted to fight in World War II, in general, the Italian people were not really on board with being allied with Nazi Germany. That was not what they wanted to do. Okay. And so when it came time for the Allied invasion of Sicily and then the Italian mainland, okay, the Italians themselves did not fight particularly tenaciously because the reality was their heart really wasn't in it. Okay, this is not a comment on the bravery of the Italian military, not at all. But I mean, if you don't want to be fighting, what is your incentive to fight? And indeed, if you view what you're supposed to be fighting for as detrimental to your country, again, why would you want to engage in a vigorous fight? You know, the Italians were as likely to see the Allies as their liberators as they were their enemy. And that's why Hitler ended up having to devote a lot of reinforcements to Italy in order to keep Italy in the war. And in the end, he couldn't. Okay, by 1943, Italy was out of the war. And the Italian people, by and large, were happy about that. Okay, so for Hitler, Italy represented not just a vulnerability, but a critical vulnerability, because once Hitler lost Italy, he lost any ability to have an impact on what happened in the Mediterranean. And now Great Britain was able to reestablish their dominance of the Mediterranean that they had held prior to World War II and before. And that made it easier for the Allies to pursue their war aims. Okay, so that's a critical vulnerability. In this case, it was more of a moral, mental, critical vulnerability. Now there are physical critical vulnerabilities as well, just like there are with centers of gravity. But oftentimes the more important ones are mental and moral. Okay, so how do we then translate this? How do we apply this to business? Okay, so in any business, we have choices as to how we spend our time, okay, and how we focus, how we use our resources. So we can use our resources and sort of squander them in a bunch of things that in the end don't have a lot of meaning to making the business successful. Or we can identify our decisive aims and pursue those decisive aims. And they break down in a similar way to centers of gravity and critical vulnerabilities. Only in this case, we're not looking at our enemies, we're looking at our customers and clients. So if our customers and clients have a particular center of gravity, an area of power, we can make one of our decisive aims to enhance that center of gravity for them, to help them make it even stronger. Okay? And then another thing we can do is we can look for a critical vulnerability among our customers and clients and say, how do we protect them from their critical vulnerabilities? Okay. Now you can see that in some ways it turns military doctrine on its head, because instead of taking advantage of a critical vulnerability or seeking to destroy a center of gravity, in business, we're looking to help protect a critical vulnerability and enhance a center of gravity. And we're going to do at least one or the other of those. Now, we may have more than one decisive aim, but of course, if we have, 5 centers of gravity and 8 critical vulnerabilities we'll work with, we're probably dissipating our effort, and we're not going to do very well. Okay. Now, where do you see this in practice in the business world? Well, one place that comes to mind pretty quickly is how Elon Musk runs his companies, right? So when he took over Twitter, for example, he pared down the staffing a lot. I think he got rid of about 60% of the staffing at Twitter. And for the ones that remained, he basically said, get ready to work hard, get ready to work fast, to innovate. Okay. What he was looking to do, and I don't know that he would describe it this way, but what he was looking to do was find centers of gravity and critical vulnerabilities among Twitter users that he could then either enhance or help them protect themselves from. Okay, that's what he's looking to do. It's a client-focused, a customer-focused way of pursuing a business. And in the end, all successful businesses are doing one or the other of those. Let's just take a really mundane example. Cake mixes. Okay. So when cake mixes were developed back in probably I think the 40s, I want to say. So one of the things that was going on is, and women mostly were housewives back then, is women didn't have as much time as they wanted in order to make food for their families. And they really, they didn't want their families to miss out on dessert. And so the idea of a cake mix was developed, that you basically got the box with a cake mix, put it in a bowl, add some water, stir it, put it in a baking dish, bake it, and you're done, as opposed to having to get the flour and the eggs and the salt and the baking soda and the flavoring, and you had to do this one step, that step, whatever, and all that stuff. You could do you could make it, which might take you 30, 40 minutes. You could do a cake from a cake mix in just a few minutes. Okay. And what it was doing was, women felt vulnerable because they couldn't provide their family with dessert without just being completely overworked. Okay. And that made them feel, not as good wives and mothers, frankly. Okay. So by addressing this critical vulnerability, Pillsbury and Duncan Hines and Betty Crocker were able to develop a product that initially actually didn't sell very well because they misread the critical vulnerability. Okay. The women didn't want to just provide dessert for their families. They wanted to feel like they had done the work to provide dessert without it taking a tremendous amount of time. And that's why with most cake mixes, you add both eggs and water to the cake mix. That simple additional ingredient made women feel like they were making the cake, not the mix. And after that, cake mix sales took off, and the rest, as they say, is history, right? And do people still make cakes from scratch? I mean, I assume bakers do, but at home, my daughter is a big time baker, but she uses cake mixes because what she's found is she can make a cake from scratch, but in the end, the cake mixes are so good, it's hard to match the quality that she gets from a cake mix making it from scratch. Plus, it takes so much more time to make it from scratch. Okay, So in the same way, now we can also look at, well, where are centers of gravity in business being addressed? So let's say that you have okay. So let's look at financial services. Okay. So for most people, okay, when they invest in financial services, they tend to invest in mutual funds, okay, because a lot of people invest through their retirement accounts, whether it's IRAs, KIOs, those kind of things, 401ks, okay, and mutual funds are ideally suited for that. That type of investing is a center of gravity in financial services, okay? So what can we do to enhance that center of gravity? And what we've seen in the mutual funds industry is more and more options for different kinds of funds that allow people to have ever more diverse mutual fund portfolios to choose from, to be able to more closely align their investing with their goals. And they've developed fund families, so you could have Fidelity, you can have Franklin Templeton, all these various mutual fund companies, and they have a large number of different funds, and that gives people the ability to diversify within the same fund family, okay? And so then from there, how do we make it an even stronger center of gravity? Well, we reduce fees or get rid of fees. So if for many mutual fund families, you can switch between different funds within the same family without having to pay commissions, okay? Now, I don't want to get into a big tax thing, but you don't want to be switching stuff around, especially in your retirement accounts, without checking to make sure that you're doing it in a way where there are no tax consequences. So that's something for you to talk to your accountant about, or your financial advisor, whatever. So like I said, I want to get into tax stuff. I just do want to note that I'm not saying you should do this. I'm just saying mutual funds have evolved to the point where we can do these things. So they looked at a particular center of gravity for their customers, investing in retirement accounts. They expanded the offerings. They made them more interchangeable, if you will, all to the benefits of customers, giving them ever more enhanced ability to meet their retirement investment objectives. Okay, so we could do the same thing with virtually any business if we want to examine how can that business identify its decisive aims in a way that will help the business grow and be stronger. Okay, so that was good timing. So that's our final lesson on the theory of war applied to business with respect to Marine Corps warfighting doctrine. So let's just take a real quick moment to again look at the 5. So levels of activity, actions, styles, generating power, and decisive aims. Okay, so if you look at those 5 aspects of the theory of war and apply them to business, I think you will find that you will be much more focused on how to gain success and how to motivate your people, how to deploy your people more effectively in meeting your decisive aims. And you'll waste a lot less time, a lot less energy by following these principles. So if you have any questions or any thoughts on any of these shows, these links will be in the show notes, my email address, various social media sites. You can always leave a message or a note there. Oh, I got to change this LinkedIn. There is a Way to Wow show page on LinkedIn. Better to go there. Although if you want to contact me personally through LinkedIn, feel free. And oops, I went backwards. Okay, and that just leaves us, with all the legal stuff. So there it is. Going to go ahead and close out of. Well, actually, I'll just stop the sharing. So that is our show for today. We spend a half an hour each Tuesday talking about military principles and history and applying them to business. So I hope you enjoyed today's show, and look forward to seeing you next week in this time slot as we continue with our discussion of business lessons from the military. Tomorrow is my show, People Making Money. That's at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. And then next Monday, which, yesterday was that show, but now looking forward to next Monday, is Trusts and Estates Weekly, in which we focus on how can we expand our businesses, how can we make money dealing with helping people work with their trusts and estates. So that's a more specific one. This show and the show tomorrow are more general. I invite you to join us all three of those shows. And if you missed any of them, please go to our YouTube page and our YouTube channel, and all of our shows are there for you to watch on demand. So thanks very much for joining you. Again, I'm Kevin Bemmel, your host. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow and next week. And Marie, darling, you are my bell. Have a great rest of the day.